Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.
Been listening to your music for such a long time and have you on so many records, and the Rosetta Trio. I have a CD actually of Jamie Foxx, like from 2006, with you, and Tactiles by Liberty, like, you know, the first records you did. I love that stuff. Like, that's when I first saw your name. I was like, man, that's amazing. And you know, the Rosetta also, I love it. I mean, you know, being a guitarist, you playing with two guitarists, that's of course like a natural for me to follow. So, but I'll just jump in. I wanted to ask you, listen to the last album by the Borderlands Trio, and which is amazing, you know, because you guys have impros that are like 40 minutes long and 30 minutes long, and Old Growth, it just goes, you know, you explore so many areas, and it's fascinating that it never gets repetitive, or it does in a sense that you want it so, but you're always exploring something new. And I wanted to ask you, how did you guys approach this record? Because it's so, I mean, it's really fresh and open, and it's despite the long tunes and compositions.
Well, thank you for asking about that. So the album is called Wandersphere, and so that's Chris Davis on piano and Eric McPherson on drums. So that's our second album. The first one is Astero Idea from a few years ago. And that is just, we approach that music the way we always do. Of course, the Wandersphere session was a particularly special one because it was, I think, December 11th of 2020. So, you know, deep in this, deep in the lockdown, and we were all so desperate to play together and make some music. And that group, because we don't have any rehearsal, and we just pick up where we left off. It's a great group to, you know, to be able to take into the studio. You know, we found a place where we could be comfortable but have some separation, so we could have that sense of caution, and so it was just a magical experience convening that day. And it turned out to be Eric's 50th birthday, which he didn't
really. Oh man,
we had forgotten about it. He didn't even tell us until after the session. I guess he didn't want to distract us. Which is typical Eric, you know. It's not about him, you know. It's about something far greater, and and that really says a lot about what makes that group special. So there's no prescribed music or anything. We just go in there and start creating together. And the thing that's key, well, I think there's several keys to that group. One is that we're all, there's no sense of genre or any kind of like, we're trying to make this kind of music or that kind of music. It's totally wide open. And I think one of the traps of improvised music, both from the perspective of players and unfortunately audience, is that it seems to be like there's an expectation of what it's supposed to sound like. You know, when you say like free jazz or improvisation, even, I think people, you know, in our need to categorize things, perhaps we put it into some kind of a box. So that's, you know, for us, it's important that that's just not there. It's, as far as like, we're not trying to filter any influences or inspiration. It's just, let's create together. And the other thing that goes with that is, I think everyone in the band has a very broad sense of orchestration and the possibilities of exploration on one's instrument. So the sense of like what roll, in my case, the bass, or or the drum set, or certainly the piano in Chris's case, like what the breadth of the role or roles that instrument can play in the music. So it's not about like I'm playing bass now. It's I am part of orchestrating this music, and what else is happening in the music right now, and what type of what can I offer that to make it keep growing and maintain interest, right? So it's and then dial that back on a very core level, is that all three of us love to groove, so I think the key to this thing is we're always, I mean, things can get really ethereal and very texture oriented, it can go all kinds of places, but there's no point at which we're not connecting rhythmically with each other. So there's always this sense of magnetism that's happening, and we're always orbiting one another, even if we're not being explicit with the beat at a certain moment. Like the beat may be here,
but you're not playing actually.
I'm over here, I'm like orbiting it here, and Eric may be orbiting it here, and Chris may be orbiting something off of him, so it can get very dimensional, but there's always an orbit, there's always gravitation, and there's always relation, even if it's sort of complex and several planes separated. It's always connecting, and when you connect, I guess the one other thing that I would say is when you connect in that sense of a little more obliquely, but still powerfully and with focus, but not always on that ground level, it makes things more generative. It leaves like the door is always a little bit open to go into the next area.
True.
Right? True. Because you're not all locked in on like these 4 beats, right? You may be referring to them from different places, which means it can easily sort of grow. It can start to lean more into any one of those directions, and then start growing, like a new solar system can start growing from there,
Yeah. Did you guys talk about that? Like when you... No, it just happened naturally. Even like the long impros, did you say like we're gonna just play, or like it actually happened that you just played 40 minutes, or did you decide like you're gonna do like long ones? Or
no, on the first record, Asteroidea, we did that. It has more pieces, and we said, okay, we just played for a while, and it was a number of shorter pieces, and then we thought, okay, let's do one that just, we say go, and we're all just in really intense, and make it like a short piece that so little ideas like that, conceptual or energy oriented ideas of something like, okay, well, we haven't done a piece like this, so let's try that. In this case, it was just, no, like I said, we were all just so grateful to be together, and we just got set up and got comfortable with the sound, and then it started, and then we just pushed record, and the whole double album is the 4 pieces that happened, and we didn't talk about it at all. And it was just like at the end, I think we did a couple of pieces, then took a little break, and then did a couple more, and at the end it was almost like we could have kept going, but we didn't want to have too much material, because we thought we were just making one record, right? And so we thought, well, like, this is good, we're good. And then it turned out that we didn't want to let any of that stuff go. All of the music declared that it needed to live, so fortunately the good people at Intact agreed to release the whole thing, and they love it. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it'll be a fun group to bring to Europe, right? To play gigs. I mean, sounds like a fun live trio. I mean, to see.
It's always just magical, that band. It's always great. And yes, we've been to Europe. I think we've done a couple of tours, and we're working on some dates for summer of 2022. So hopefully that'll happen. But yes,
beautiful. Hope to catch you. Yeah, it's like you said. I love it. It's like improvised. It's not free jazz. Always this term free jazz, like you said, it has this many times this bad connotation next to it, because like free music can really suck many times, honestly, and I play improvised music many times as well, but
so a couple
you make it sound different. I mean, that's what I was trying to say, that like you said,
well, here the way I talk about it is, instead of saying improvisation, I like to say spontaneous composition.
Yeah,
because that's tells you more about what's actually happening, because we are like, I can't say any of us is thinking in the moment, but our sensibilities regarding composition, regarding details in the moment, but also a sense of form on a larger scale, or all of that stuff is coming to play. It's just unfolding in the moment. And the other key, I already said I only had one more thing to say about it.
No, come on, please.
Other things that come to mind about the process of engaging in spontaneous composition is a couple of things. One is that it has to be about trying to release your preconceived notions, release your fears, release your ego as much as possible, and make yourself more vulnerable and more present in the moment. So it's really about going deeper and deeper into the moment and being fully sensitized and fully open to everything that's going on, and then moving with that. And when you offer something into the music, not making it, not imposing like fixed structures that can often happen, in improvisation, where it's like, oh, I have this thing worked out, or I have that thing worked out, or I hear that chord, I know I can play this over that chord. No, like that, all that stuff has to go away, and you need to just move with the moment and not impose yourself on the moment. Yeah. So when you offer something, it needs to, like, again, it needs to be something that has logic and clarity to it as far as the DNA of it, but has a little bit of opening for some, for other people to grab onto it. And it's not so rigid and fixed that it can't be played with and then replicated and manipulated by someone else. You have to be generous and unafraid to give, but also not impose with that giving.
How did you learn that? Fear is such a good word in this case, because especially when it comes to improvising, many times we're afraid to play something right or wrong. This idea of what is right and what is wrong, many times in jazz especially, or improv. How did you learn this? Like, train yourself not to be afraid of just playing nothing, or just one tone, or whatever.
Yeah. That's a great question. I don't know how to answer that, because it's a combination of everything that I've learned through musical experience, but also things that I've read and other life experiences that I've had, just learning that we have to engage fear and move through it in order to grow. You know, if you think about like most of the pivotal life experiences that one has, they most often involve a moment of fear that must be confronted and moved through, and that's when we grow. And so that you know, you can't on the musical front, these things that I'm talking about can't happen with any group of people, because you have to trust. You have to have trust. You have to have trust, and you have to be with people who are also engaging in that openness and that relinquishing of ego, and they're not imposing on the music. Because if I feel that from other people, and there's plenty of situations where that occurs, even with great musicians, they're more, you know, they have their things that they do and they sort of present them. And you could say they impose them on the music, because they're not coming to the music with full openness. You know, they're saying, okay, I'm here, we're playing this, and here's what I do. Right? And that's more of an ego-oriented thing. And when I'm in that situation, I can, you know, in most cases I can handle it. It's like, okay, well, this is what we're doing. I can do this, you know. So, but you're not going to get all of me. You're going to get part of me, and I can deliver, you know, in most cases that I'm in, I can deliver to a satisfactory degree. But that music is never going to be as broad, as rich, and as spiritual as an environment where everyone is really opening themselves and embracing fear, because they can trust that they're safe with the other people. So yeah, there's plenty of times where I remember in the first record, in Asteroidea, one of the first piece, may have been the first piece we played, Chris started it, and she started it with this really fast, low, like basically playing bass. So, you know, I was expecting had been prepared to maybe play some low notes, but she came in with that. So, you know, in the moment, it's like, okay, as I said, it's not about playing bass at that point. It's about, what does the music need? Well, the music needed some kind of higher voice, you know, to balance that. So I knew I needed to go up high and something vocal. So I grabbed the bow, and there I go. And it's like, man, to just jump in way up high and be the lead singer in that moment is really scary.
Yeah.
But you just have to say, all right, I'm diving, I'm going. And with Chris and Eric, I know that they won't let me fall. Like, I know I can go for it, and whatever happens, even if it's wrong in the sense that, oh, I landed like a half step away from the note that I was targeting.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. I did that, like, first of all, I know to just make it work, but they instantly, you know, the whole organism instantly shapeshift around it to, you know, another way of seeing that is that it's everyone's constantly offering information, but also recontextualizing the information that others are offering. You know, so the context is always shifting to support all the information that's going on. So it's about openness, love, trust, in embracing fear.
What do you do if this doesn't happen in some cases? You know, let's say, I mean, I wanted to ask you about solo playing also. I will do that because, you know, when you're playing solo bass, I listened to the plenty of solo stuff you've done during the lockdowns now on solo bass, and it's beautiful, man.
Oh, thank you.
Rocket Love and that Search for Peace and some beautiful tunes and impros. And there's a different beast than playing solo. You're naked basically or alone. But when playing improv situations and it doesn't go anywhere, how do you, if it happens, how do you deal with that then?
So explain to me a little bit more how you mean. Do you mean if I'm in a situation?
Yeah, I mean,
where,
like for me,
with
like
a group.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
You feel that the music is not. Let's say during a lockdown this year, I played some improv gigs. I got invited, and it was just an ad hoc group put together, and it was just, people didn't listen really a lot. I was like stuck in it, what to do now, and you get frustrated on stage and playing. So how do you deal in such situations if you have them?
Okay. I would say that, obviously it's just if you're in a bad situation with people who are not able to really engage and be open and create something together, to a certain degree, there's not much you can do and you're just going to have to get through it. But I think the answer is, I think if you clench and try to fight your way through it by starting to impose things on the music yourself, it's just going to be a fight. So I think the answer is still to try to at least exercise being in the moment and accepting whatever it is that's coming at you, even if it's coming at you instead of sort of being with you. Just try to accept it and go with it, because that's the situation. And at least, if it's not going to be a completely uplifting or even satisfying situation, you may learn something from the experience of trying to engage with acceptance and
makes sense.
Try to be in the moment with it. One thing about this that you asked me how I got these ideas, which has been just a lifelong process. But one thing I learned from, I've gotten to teach up at the Banff creative music program a couple of summers over these last few years, and I had the privilege of being on the faculty with Gary Bartz a few summers ago, and one of his lectures, he talked about it. He talked about this similar thing in the sense of you're either playing the music from the inside out or the outside in. And what he meant by that, and that's been a very helpful image for me. Playing from the outside in is what I was saying, where you have your licks and you have your structures and you have the things that you know how to play, and you're in a musical situation and it's like, okay, here's the groove, I know these chords, I know these, this progression, I know I can do this, and I'm just going to do those. So that's playing from the outside in, right? You're superimposing structures that will work, and that's music as like sort of a commodity. It's like an additive process. Was like you put this and this and this together, and you put it in the blender, and here's your music. So that and there's a ton of that goes on, and it works in to a certain degree in certain situations. And it works for even a lot of what we think of as jazz musicians or creative musicians who have operate at a very high level. On the other hand, playing from the inside out is what we've been talking about, where all of that goes away and you try to just keep putting yourself, because it's a process and it's very hard, keep putting yourself deeper and deeper into the moment, and just so that you can actually be living inside the music as it's unfolding. And then you offer yourself into that from there. And that's what Borderlands Trio does. That's the mode that we're all trying to stay in. And it's just it's it's an experience for the players and for the audience that's just totally incomparable. It's on such a bigger universal level, because you're communing with everything.
Yeah Beautiful. How do you deal with this, what you've just said, in a solo bass situation? I mean, it's like if you're in a trio, it's like a basketball team, you can assist, you can, like you said, but playing solo, it's like you're basically very intimate,
Yeah. Well, okay, so talk about embracing fear. Like
that's what I mean.
Solo playing is kind of the ultimate as far as teaching yourself how to confront the fear and then move right through it. You can't run from it, because the music will fall apart. You have to just keep going into the fear. But really, the process has to be the same, in that for it to work, you have to keep pushing yourself deeper and deeper into the moment and accepting everything that just happened. And it's this constant process of like, I want to go here from there, and then something a little bit, you fall a little bit short, or something a little bit different happens. And instead of getting upset about that and tightening up, and because when we do that, when we approach the music like that, it's like, oh, I'm messing this up, I'm not getting this right. What happens is we start running from the fear, and we start playing the music from the outside in. The fear makes us go, oh shit, I'm not getting this right. I know this will work, and I know this will work, and I'll bail myself out with that. That happens, and I find myself, I have those moments of like where that happens to me, and it's because this is a process. It's not like I can be in the moment and just stay there. You have to keep putting yourself there. It's like meditation, but at any rate, what I'm trying to get to, and what's so rewarding about the embracing that fear of playing solo is, you, instead of having a whole group supporting, you have to make a gesture, accept it, sort of have this sense of remove from it, and just experience it with a sense of wonder and curiosity, and then respond to it. It's like and as long as you keep that process intact, where everything is relating to the thing that came before, as long as that sense of relation is always unfolding, then there will be a common DNA at the core of the music.
Kind of,
So it's really about you make an opening phrase, you respond to it, you contextualize it, and then continue it, and then you have all of this stuff that happened, and then you do the same thing. So it's about staying open, staying curious, and maintaining that sense of wonder, and just being in the moment, and just going with it. And it's really hard.
Because like playing double bass solo, or even bass, I mean, you can play chords and harmony in a way, but on the guitar it's a little bit easier. On bass it's really like, it's a heavy thing. I've talked about this with Michael Formanek and Mark Elias and all these older guys who are, you know, monsters and they're facing the same fears or ideas like we are, you know, which is beautiful, in a way, beautiful to hear that these guys are, you know, were or are in the same zone, like, you know.
Oh, totally.
So cool.
You know, I've just started listening to Michael Formanek's latest solo release on Intact. It's amazing.
It's incredible.
So of course, you know, we're all we're all on our own path with this, you know. It's just about being on your own path and staying engaged with it and just trying to, I think I'll say it again, just maintaining that sense of wonder.
And that's so important. Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah, because if you approach things with that, then you're always appreciating. It's like, oh, that wasn't what I expected, but look what it is. And then you know, like, oh, we could do this with that. And
true. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, Stephan, this, like, you know, I mentioned now Formanek and Elias, this older generation. Like, how was it for you when you came to New York in mid-90s? I mean, the scene was incredibly active as far as I remember it. The first time I came to New York was 97, and it was, for me, it blew my mind. I remember it just, like, so many impulses. But, like, how was it for you musically when you entered that scene in the beginning? And
well, it was amazing. I moved to New York in 1994. Okay. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, and I moved up to Massachusetts for college for 4 years. Although I did my third year, and I did a year abroad in Paris.
Oh, really? Oh, wow, man.
Yeah, which is where my mom is. My mom is from Paris originally, so I have a deep connection, and have spent a lot of time in France in my life. But at any rate, when I was in college in Massachusetts, a classmate of mine was a guitarist, a really great guitarist on the, like, funk and R&B scene, and he was from Brooklyn, and he had gigs in the Village, weekly gigs. And so I started, you know, when, like, my first year of college, when I was 18, I started going down to New York once a week to play with him on that scene. And he would hire a drummer from you know, local drummer and rhythm guitarist, and so it was amazing, because I got a sense of the level of musicianship in New York, and also a sense that we were enjoying making music together, you know, that I felt like I had a place, you know. So I knew I was moving to New York, you know, 4 years. As soon as I finished, I knew I was headed to New York. And when I did, I was really wide open. You know, I play electric bass and acoustic bass. And it was really about, I wanted to make a life in music. And it wasn't necessarily that I was only going to be playing, like, improvised music, or even, like, you know, creative music or jazz, or what, you know, whatever we want to, how we want to talk about it. I was playing with songwriters and playing, like, doing gigs on the, you know, funk and R&B scene, blues gigs, doing film scoring sessions, and you know, doing really anything at first, just meeting people and learning. And you know, over time, I mean, I was always composing and always interested in improvisation and creative music, and so that was always an emphasis. But I wasn't just pursuing one scene, in other words. So, and I think that's you know, that created some challenges for me career-wise, because I think there are benefits to having, like, just one focus and just going. But at the same time, I accept that that's just who I am, and this has been my path, and it's been a little bit it has some meandering to it, but I think all of those things inform each other, and I think the focus, for instance, of playing with a songwriter and trying to develop a bass line through the course of a fixed piece, and that not only supports the piece but adds a layer of meaning, or like a song within the song, that really adds depth and development, is like that kind of focused process, I think absolutely comes to play in, Borderlands Trio, for instance, when I'm just doing that in the moment. So, and vice versa. Just as two examples of, I think of them as modes of music making, and I don't separate them so much. I think the more we distill the music, the more, the fundamentals are absolutely in common. And I'll say, I think it really comes down to shaping a flow of energy. It's about tension and release. It's really tension and release on the micro all the way to the macro, from like, sort of the rub of two notes together, like that tension and release, all the way to song structure, even in like programming album order, when you're deciding that's
everything
tension and release, right? So at every level, so it's about that, and I'm always, it always needs to feel great. That's my first priority in every situation. Is I think the music is a visceral experience on the first order, like you could say rhythmic, like the waves of energy impact us on a physical, they impact our bodies first, and then we process the more, what you think of like the second and third order information of like what the pitches are, and the intonation and the timbre and all that stuff, all of which is fascinating, and then like how they add up to be a melody or harmony and all that stuff. Like I'm all that stuff is super important to me, but I think it's feel first, the rhythm of things and how they interact. And so I'm always focused on shaping that energy of relation rhythmically on the first order.
It's funny that you mentioned this tension and release, and making it feel good and all these terms, because when I listened to your compositions, you said you started composing very early, and you on your Bandcamp, there are like compositions to buy, and I checked some tunes like Residual, for instance. I love that one, or many Miriam's Waltz or whatever. Like you have these beautiful melodies. Like I hear the importance of melody when you write, but then like in the Residual, there comes this again, like this surprise 5/8 part in between or something like that. So is that how you think in terms of composing also, that you lead us somewhere and then you're like, okay, how do you deal with the composition? You write an A part and then like, okay, we're stuck, or you want to go somewhere else, or how do you approach this?
It's usually pretty intuitive, in the sense that there are rare occasions where I map things out very deliberately, or sort of impose a certain structural parameter on myself and then work within that. I mean, there's so many ways to engage in composition, and I think it's important. It can be helpful to impose that on ourselves, like, okay, these are the parameters I'm going to work with here. Give yourself some limitations so you can focus and be creative within that atmosphere. But I would say that especially in composing for groups where you're trying to elicit creative development and improvisation, where you're in a group with improvisers where it's not all fixed, there's a balance that has to be struck between what the composition provides, what it sets out, but it needs to not impose so much on the players that they feel constrained by it. They need to be, they need to be freed by it. They need to be inspired by it, and free to be themselves. But there's a certain, like, the DNA at the core of the composition has to be strong enough such that it gives people freedom, but it's like the atmosphere within which they can explore is vivid enough so that it can maintain itself, but still let them give them as much agency as possible. So I think I've gotten more to that. I've learned over the years, both in my own band leading experience and in some of the groups that I've been in with others, where I'm looking to control things less and less. I want to give people more agency, and that's a hard thing to do. Like, how do you create a composition that has a strong enough DNA or strong enough identity to the atmosphere that it, people can play within it and it still is cohesive as a composition, but that doesn't shackle them with too much information, and it's really hard. But some of the compositions you just referenced are really earlier ones, like Miriam's Wall. That's my first record, Poems and Other Things, and that one, I think that was those were, I wasn't thinking so much about what I was just talking about as far as the band leading. It was more like, here are the songs, and here are the solo sections that different people, that was a quartet. In that case, I think a lot of it is balancing, especially back then. I felt like I do have a very a melodic sense that can be very open-hearted, and so it's about balancing. It's like cooking. Like, you don't want it to be too sweet, right? So like I need to balance this melody with a little bit more tension in the harmony so that it doesn't become cloying, or so it's about balancing those elements, both, or shifting a note in the melody so it's like, oh, this is getting really sweet, but there's a little bit of a sour thing that balances it. And then also structurally, like, if you're creating, you're going in a certain direction, that often that I think how to talk about structural balance, like it's at times you're either you're repeating something so that it builds a certain kind of tension, and then that needs to be released into a bridge that that shifts the color, and then that creates its own own expectations and tensions that and then you may come back to a version of the original material, or that is also about tension and release on the structural level. And I think one way to talk about that is is expectation. Like,
yeah. Oh, that's a heavy word always.
yeah. Well, so like with, with motifs and repetition, like we create a certain expectation,
Yeah.
right? Here's the A, and then you repeat the A with slight variations, and you've created this expectation. And so you can create this beautiful tension then by introducing a B theme that subverts that expectation and creates surprise. And then, then you go from there. Do you need to go back? Do you want to go to yet another thing? It just depends on the material at hand. But I think one way to consider that is that you're shaping tension and release around expectation that you create with the composition, and then you must decide if you're going to continue that and bolster it and grow it in a certain way, or undermine it and create sparks in that manner.
Yeah. Did you already think, like, you mentioned poems and other things, and you were like 24, I think, or 25 when you did that. Was your vision already then like that? The way of thinking now? I mean, you said not so developed as now, but like it seems like for me a beautiful record. And
thank you.
When was the moment when you decided like I want to become a band leader, or this is the time to record? Like, because you mentioned you've collaborated. I want to talk about your collaborations a little bit later, but with so many musicians, and but you've been like an extremely prolific leader and composer. So how did that moment happen for you? When was the moment to say like, okay, I want to do this now?
Yeah, thank you. I think it was, as I said, so that was, I think we may have recorded it in 1996 and it was released in 97. So it was just a couple of years after I'd moved to New York. And like I said, I was engaging in all these different scenes and modes of music making. But I did have these compositions, many of which I had started in my year abroad in Paris.
Yes. Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
then continued through into my early time in New York. And so a lot of the, so I was doing these different gigs in the evenings, but a lot of times I started meeting musicians who would get together in the daytime just to play, whether it was like jazz standards or whatnot, and people would bring their compositions. So that's how I started. And as you were asking earlier, like, what do you do when you're in a group and it's not really working, and you just get through it. And especially in those early years in New York, because I was just trying to meet as many people as I could, there were a lot of really tough tough sessions in those afternoons playing with people where it's like, right off the bat that it's gonna be very limited as far as the connection and the depth of the creation. But eventually I did find, like in that case, Rob Garcia on drums and Chris Cheek on saxophones and Roberta Piket on piano. I sort of connected with them through different other colleagues and friends, and had a hunch about a certain kinship, and I felt that they would what it is, I felt comfortable with them revealing myself
To do it.
because it talk about embracing fear. That my compositions are very personal to me. I put a lot of myself, I open myself up, as I try to do in my spontaneous compositions in my playing, but there was a lot of all of myself in that music, and so it's frightening to reveal that to people. And I found a kinship with those musicians and a trust. And so we started getting together, and I had with no plan to record the music. I just I thought, like, let me try these pieces with them. And after getting together a few times, it was like, wow, this is really coming together and sounding like its own thing and very special. And so then that was when I decided to record the band.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Were you comfortable in that role? I mean, when I look at your groups, many are like almost like co-led. It seems like, it's like you said, you found like soulmates, musical and I guess personal also, that you can, develop the music. But being a band leader, how do you see your development through years? Have you become more comfortable, or like how did you learn to, or from whom to do that?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I would say at that point early on, it was like I had in high school and whatnot, I had played in a lot of rock bands. Sure. And I had collective, like, co-led groups, and then in college I played in a lot of different kinds of groups, but certainly a lot of jazz ensembles. And so that was, I guess my perspective on band leading in a jazz quartet was like, okay, well, we're going to play my compositions if that's what we're doing, and I have to make decisions about orchestration and who's, how we're soloing. I think in that case, on, like, speaking of poems and other things, I was definitely, and this goes certainly into the Rosetta material, and there's always a sense of like, I'm not wanting it to be like, okay, here's the tune and we're all gonna solo on it and then we're gonna play the head out.
Yeah,
like
I see that.
Yeah, I'm interested in, like, there's something that has to be that has to make sense for me about the overall structure. Like, I want it to be cohesive as a composition and have the improvisation play a role in that, but not take over. I don't want it just to be about, it's like a forum for everyone to blow a couple of choruses or whatever, like a jam session or something. That can be interesting as its own thing, but for me, what happens is the composition gets obliterated and it's no longer about that. So I'm, in that context, that's what I'm interested in. So the decisions I make are about, like, who should solo where, and what elements of the composition should we use for those solo forms. And that could be different for the different solos. Like, if there's two different solos, we may use different areas, and they may not be, it may be the structure may need to be manipulated so that it has a nice a beautiful overall shape, from the overall, the big picture. So that was how I approached that. And and then with Rosetta Trio,
how was Rosetta formed, by the way? Because it's been like your really ongoing project for 15 years almost, I guess, or even more.
It's true. And that was another situation where well, so right before that, I had this one-off group that Tuckahoe album, which was a quintet with Chris Cheek and Miguel Zenon, and then Dan on saxophones and Dan Rieser on drums and Jamie Foxx on guitar, which was a really wonderful band. Still, the compositions were, I think, more in a lot of senses, I guess, more, how to say it, more based on known structures, or
I know what you mean. I know what you
mean. Referencing music that is understood, but then with a different twist on it. I think on Poems and Tuckahoe, I can see that, you know, from now, like looking at those compositions, like some of them. I remember the engineer when we finished the Tuckahoe recording. He was like, "What are these tunes? Are these like?" He didn't say from the real book or something, but there was something like that made sense in that greater context
structure
about the material. Yeah, and so, you know, I took that well. I guess it was my idea was to just sort of do my own twist on more known structures, you know. But that Tuckahoe album, the release date was September 11th, 2001 for that.
Oh shit,
that
really?
record.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh.
And so, you know, that, and we lost a friend in the towers. We saw the towers fall from our own rooftop in Brooklyn.
Man.
That just started a whole thing, like, you know, as much as you know, things immediately got used, all of that immediately got weaponized. All the potential goodness of that tragedy was immediately undermined and weaponized by the government, you know, and like using this whole thing where there was before and after September 11th. But so I don't like to use that structure, but the fact is, for me personally, it did change a lot. You know, that was a really it like the music that Tuckahoe music no longer made sense to me, like, you know, through the and I mean, very, very much even eclipsed by the Zone period that we're living through right now. Is like I don't know how to go back. Like, I need to just leave some space for something new to come, you know, to start growing within me for my next compositional projects, because what I had been doing before no longer makes sense in context, right? So that's what happened. As much as I loved that Tuckahoe group, it sort of just, it no longer made sense, and I found myself the music that I was creating in the months and even couple of years after that, experiencing 9/11, was sort of fragmented, but I knew I was documenting it. I would just record myself playing actually at this Rhodes in my old studio, and something was coming, you know, and after a while I started taking these fragments and organizing them together and putting some pieces together. But it was very, very personal, very emotional music, and I needed to try it with some people I needed to have a lot of trust. I also knew, you know, talk about balancing elements. I also knew that because this was there was so much emotion in the music, if I had been using saxophones previously, I knew if I gave those melodies to saxophone, it might just lean too much into it might be too emotional. I need a better way of saying is I needed something drier.
I know what you mean.
And and a guitar is a lot drier than a horn, generally speaking.
Definitely.
So I thought, I mean, some people's sounds, depending on how you approach the instrument, but generally speaking. So again, I wasn't thinking about putting a group together or making a recording, but I thought, let me get together with Liberty Ellman and Jamie Foxx, both of whom I had been playing with in their bands and in other groups. And they were good friends of mine. I trusted them, and they had never played together, but I had a hunch that they would really enjoy each other personally and musically. And so we got together a few times, and I just had documented the rehearsals with a stereo mic. And as I was listening back to it, it was just immediately made sense. Like the stereo guitars, acoustic and electric, and the bass down the middle, and it just like this sense, the dryness of that worked as far as balancing the emotion and the music. And it was just sonically really fascinating, engaging. And so we started working at it. And one of the things that was really illuminating and really sent me down this path of leaning into more unorthodox groups, like drumless groups, and smaller ensembles like duos and solo, or like drumless trios, duos, and solo. Is one of the things that I learned about playing in Rosetta is like, well, first of all, as you strip away elements of a group, it makes it puts more responsibility on each individual member as far as orchestrating music, right? So the role that each person plays in the music is far more expansive and multifaceted. And so to engage with that forces you to grow, and it forces you to reevaluate what you can potentially offer in the music. And the other thing, as an acoustic bassist, especially, like I find that in more traditional lineups, especially with piano and drums, especially when you play with pianists who like to live on the bottom range of the piano a lot, like there's so much, and drummers who play with a lot of tone. It's, you know, we're like drummers, we're now living in like a post-rock, post-hip-hop reality as far as how most drummers conceive of the sonic range of the kit, right? Which takes up a lot of space, especially in the bottom. Like I was constantly finding myself like with a lot of the expressive range of my instrument just covered up.
Yeah, that's true.
You know? And not a lot of room to explore sonically. It made my role like more constricted, and one about just like giving a certain energy and a certain pulse, which can be great and, you know, rewarding in the right group at the right music. It's all good. But I needed at that point to explore some other things. So I wanted to strip that stuff away. And another really important thing that I learned from those early Rosetta rehearsals was that everyone, you know, I was talking about earlier, rhythm is first for me, you know, and I realized everyone is the rhythm section in the sense that each musical gesture, meaning like a note that you play as a musical gesture, each musical gesture, I think, interacts on a rhythmic level first, you know, before those other levels we talked about. And therefore each gesture within the music is adding up to create the feel and create imply the time, right, wherever that may need to go. And those guys in that group, like as guitarists, they were more accustomed to being able to lay back in the time, like lean back against the bassist and the drummer, who would then push them, right? And that's what, in a lot of contexts, that's what makes things feel really good when you have a more traditional rhythm section. But what I found was with that music, if just the two guitars and the bass, if those guys are always leaning back like that rhythmically, it meant that I always had to be the one pushing. And yet the music was calling for the sort of the baton to be passed around a lot as far as who had the melody or who had the sort of the lead solo. And of course, a lot of times it was totally collective and pointillistic and linear. But what we learned was, especially early on, we spent a lot of time working on, okay, here in this section, I have the melody, so I need you guys to push the time a little bit more, give it a little more lift, right? So that I can lean back and make the melody feel good and not feel like I also have to push the time and play the melody because it doesn't work.
Yeah, sure.
And if
No, it's
I
beautiful.
tried to let go and lay back with the melody, and they were also laying back, the time would just, you know,
Yeah, it's going down.
so it was fascinating to discover that and have to work on it very explicitly. And we talked about like, okay, you need to push here so he can lay back, and I, you know, vice versa, and figure it out. And then after a while, you know, we've made what did we make?
Yeah.
Four records, and then we also did a record with my wife Jen Chapin where we were her band. That's called Light of Mine. You know, those later records, we no longer had to talk about that when I would bring a new composition, or I also invited the guys to bring their own compositions to the group eventually, which, you know, are on the more recent records.
Yeah, I love Outliers. What you described now. If you listen to Outliers and the first Rosetta, 2006,
Yeah.
it's such a development of a band. Actually, it's like a band.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful to hear that. So.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's just been this. I never expected to do that first record, and I certainly didn't expect to still be doing it after 15 years.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
we'll
beautiful.
see. We'll see from now, but it just became such an organism. You
Yeah.
know, it like wanted to keep living and wanted to keep growing, and I kept being inspired to try new things with it, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, that's continued to grow. And the other thing that is interesting about that group is that we were able to record together in not in this studio, but in the apartment we just sold. We floated a room within a room. It was on springs, like a whole.
Oh wow, man.
Yeah. And I started, you know, I've always been interested in recording since my teens, and I've just gotten more and more serious about it. So, so I recorded and mixed those, and that's been my approach to each of those 4 or 5 albums. Were all recorded in that room, and I mixed them, and
Wow.
so
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
it's nice to engage in that level of the art as well.
Yeah.
For those, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love this group. It's you know, being a guitarist, and it's fun. It's also different because it's like more chamber-like in the nowadays jazz world. It's quite hard, you know. And this is such a beautiful, intimate group that you have. Like, you know, it's like, okay, we can do that, and it's nothing wrong with it, you know. So that's beautiful.
No, and you know, it's funny, like when we've toured, it's been a while since we've been in Europe, but we've done a number of tours in Europe. And
You were with that. I didn't know that. Oh man.
yeah, it's been a while, and I find, you know, when people engage with the music, it's like it really reaches people.
Yeah.
But I also find that a lot of booking, you know, there's like these specific parameters that people have when they book jazz, and they're like, what? There's not drums and a trumpet and a piano, or what, you know, whatever it is that whatever idea they have, or they think their audience, you know, will have. Sometimes it's like it's challenging. You know, for me, that's interesting. I want to try things that are different and try to make them work and grow. You know, it can also be interesting to use traditional materials, which is kind of like what I did with Poems and Other Things in Tuckahoe. Is like, okay, let me use these more traditional structures and try to put my own twist on it. That's a good challenge too.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, lately, you know, and in a sense, that's what I did with the Rhombal quartet. I moved back to trying to work with more traditional lineup. That one is bass, drums, trumpet, and tenor saxophone. But in that case, I wanted to remove any chordal instrument and make the harmony come from sort of the lattice of linear interaction, and sometimes in the compositions I made it more vertical. Where the band itself is the piano, right? And so sometimes it's vertical and sometimes it's linear. But that was for me. That was the interest in that was like putting together a group with drums again, but still leaving myself more space and more responsibility by not having a chordal instrument.
Yeah.
So, and more freedom for everyone, and responsibility, and then having horns again, because it had been a long time since I had horns. So that was that was that.
That's a burning group.
Incredible experience putting that group together, and especially like Adam O'Farrell and Ellery Eskelin, those guys. Those guys had never played together, and like just from the very first rehearsal we had, just the sounds alone of those two musicians, like just hearing them warm up in the room together, it was already like absolute magic. And so like you can't really go wrong. Like those people can play any two notes together and it's incredible. So most of the work is done, and then so we'll see. That's another group where I had, before all this pandemic business, I had like almost like probably halfway to another album of music already ready, and I was like sort of moving towards that and seeing like, are we going to do this, to do another record? And then so we'll see. I don't know if
it would be beautiful.
Just the, like I was talking about, just the changing context and what might make sense now. I'm just not sure. But I know that in the future, if it feels right, if we were to get together again and I felt those spirits and those sounds, I'm sure it would be obvious that I needed to keep going.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Stephan, just one, not to take too much of your time, just one last thing. Well, like, we mentioned rhythm and like being a foundation or a basis of everything, basically. And when I listen to your records as with Liberty, Ellman, I remember when I first heard Tactiles, I was just blown away. You and Eric Harland on drums. It's incredible. And you and Marcus Gilmore with Vijay's.
Oh yeah.
And playing all these basically heavy rhythmical structures, a lot of odd meters, long structures. How did you learn to be free in those? And how do you cope with structures like that when you got a lead sheet, which is like not 32 bars A B A, but it's like, incredible. How did you?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, and it's certainly like, I love to teach. It's something that's really important to me, and and it's certainly something that a lot of students come to me with that very question. Like they're like, how do I? Because a lot of people are, inspired by that, and are writing compositions with complicated rhythms, but I find that it's also, well, first of all, on a compositional level, it's really hard to create that and not make it a trap. Because it's easy to just write a bunch of mathematical stuff, but there needs to be a reason for it. And for me, an interest in different meters started like in my teens, listening to progressive rock, like listening to Yes, and some of the Led Zeppelin songs had different shapes, and Rush. I was super into Rush and Yes.
Oh, wow.
and Led Zeppelin, and that my experience of that music I learned a lot of it, and that involved some counting, but as far as the impact that it had on me, I perceived it as different shapes, like and that was what was so intriguing. And I think that's in my own composition, it's very rare that I set out with a sort of a mathematical goal from the start. Like, often it's about a certain feeling, and like maybe this is like an obvious groove that we are familiar with, and then there's a little skip to it or something that subverts it a little bit, but that still feels good, but in a weird way, and you're not quite sure why. That's what's interesting to me. So it always does need to make sense and feel good. Like, I don't want it to be just an intellectual exercise, because again, it has to speak to the body first, then the heart, and then the mind. And I'm interested in all of those, but in that order. So for me, when I engage with someone else's composition, say, and I'm trying to not only make it feel great, but also find out how to open the music up it can develop, right? So it's not just a trap. Well, first of all, it has to be a good composition, because if it's not, then you're not gonna find a way to develop it and make it good, right? So that's a whole other thing. But when we are dealing with something that is good, usually, here's what I look for is usually within any rhythmic pattern. Like, a lot of times there'll be like here's the groove for the A section, right? And however many beats it is, we must understand that not all of the notes in that lead sheet groove, not all of the notes are equal as far as the role that they play in the music. Yes, there are notes within that groove, within that part, that are fundamental, and then there are notes that are ornamental. And so we have to discern that and try to distill the line to its skeleton or its DNA. Very cool. Yeah. And within that, I find that there's usually two principal gestures that are like the poles. And one of them is usually a lift, which is often a key syncopation. Yeah. That is the gesture that injects energy into the music, into the groove. It injects tension. It injects energy. And so that's the lift. And then there's the landing. That's the point of release. It's usually a downbeat somewhere. Yeah. So I'm looking for the lift and the landing. And that's like a seesaw. It's the two poles around which the whole energy flow of that section is moving. It's the circuit of energy. And so and there are times when there's a third gesture that's a third pole, but most often you can distill this to two poles, the principal lift and the principal landing. So that's tension and release. Release again. And once you find that, you realize that fundamentally your role in the music is not to play all of the notes in that line every time. It's really to maintain that energy flow between those poles. So, for starters, you can try only playing, you start by playing the full line, but then you start paring back the ornamental notes. And, first of all, before you do that, this also teaches you how to play all those notes, because you realize that those ornamental notes need to not take precedence. The way you present them, they must not take precedence over the fundamental notes.
Yeah,
they must lead you to the fundamental. They're there to serve the fundamental notes, right? Or so they lead you to them, or they lead you away from them.
Yeah.
They continue the cycle, but they have to be in the back. You know, the precedence must be given to those principal gestures, the fundamental notes. Furthermore, so that tells you how to shape the phrase. But then as far as opening and developing the music, it also reveals to you that you can remove those notes or alter them. So what I have people do, and I work on this as I'm learning a new piece and trying to figure this out and create opening for myself. I'll just remove those other notes, and I'll try to keep this thing going by only playing the lift and the landing, only playing, or those 2, sometimes 3 principal gestures, and feeling that in my body. That's the other thing that's really important, is to, and this is what I have with my students. I get them, so much of the work is getting the communication going in their bodies, because I find that so much of us are just like blocked off from our bodies, and the music, especially with everyone writing such complicated rhythmic music, so much of it just stays up here. It's like in your brain and in your hands. And if we are going to communicate something more complete, we need to communicate to other people's bodies. And we can only do that if we're feeling it in our own bodies. So with students and also with myself, when I'm working on this stuff, I move with it. I'll walk down the street and I'll have quarter notes going with my feet, and I'll be singing and clapping, the other cycles in the music, and trying to teach my body what the actual physical sensations are of the music, right? What are the physical, what are the beautiful tensions in the music that are the interaction of these cycles? If you could think of it as like that beautiful tension with 2 against 3, which is such a fundamental, right? Like that feeling, like, so obviously we might be dealing with a more complex structure, but we still need to find out how to make it feel great. Because if it doesn't feel great, then it's just staying up here, and it's not interesting to me. And so I'm trying to get it in my body, and so there's dancing and singing and clapping and moving. But again, once you understand, once you get all that, and you can get those poles and maintain the identity of this, maintain that energy cycle, you realize that you gain complete freedom, because you can then add ornaments as you please. You can alter notes, you can leave notes out, and you can even start to, instead of playing those poles on the first order, instead of playing them outright, you can even suggest them by playing around them. And that gets us back to what we were talking about at the beginning with Borderlands Trio. It's like, you can orbit.
Exactly.
And if you orbit something, if you orbit a nucleus with enough power and logic and clarity, you will conjure the experience of that nucleus without having to declare it. So that's what that's about.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Stephan. Thank you for sharing some of these thoughts. So, beautiful.
It's my honor, and it's such a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for the beautiful questions.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.